America has spent more money on weight loss than any nation in human history. $78 billion a year on diet programs, meal replacements, fitness apps, appetite suppressants, gym memberships. And the country is still the most overweight it has ever been, with over 40% of adults clinically obese. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Pacific, a nation of 125 million people eats white rice at every single meal. Not brown rice, not cauliflower rice, not the apologetic rice alternatives American nutritionists have spent 30 years pushing. White rice, refined, high glycemic, the exact food your doctor told you to eliminate, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And Japan's adult obesity rate sits at 4%. 4%. Which means the most overweight developed nation on Earth has spent decades faithfully following dietary advice that the leanest developed nation has never once needed. America didn't fail to lose weight because it lacked discipline or information. It failed because it was handed the wrong model. And the right model has been sitting on a breakfast table in Osaka the entire time. And here's the thing, the difference is not genetics, not ancestry, not some metabolic advantage encoded in Japanese DNA. The proof of that is brutal. When Japanese people move to the United States and adopt the American diet, their obesity rates match their American neighbours within a single generation. One generation. The genes don't change. The food does. And the body follows the food. Every time. So the real question isn't why Japan is lean. The question is what Japan is doing to its gut microbiome that America has systematically stopped doing, and what your body becomes when you reverse that. Start with the damage, not as metaphor. As biology, your gut microbiome, roughly 3 to 4 pounds of bacterial life living in your colon, is organized around two dominant bacterial families. Firmicutes, associated with caloric extraction and fat storage, and bacteroidetes, associated with leanness, metabolic efficiency, and inflammation control. In a healthy gut, these two populations exist in rough balance. In obese American adults, firmicutes routinely outnumber bacteroidetes by 3 or 4 to 1. That imbalance is not a symptom of obesity. It is a cause of it. The same meal, consumed in a firmicute's dominant gut, extracts more calories, stores more fat, and generates more inflammatory signaling than it does in a bacteroidete's dominant gut. You could be eating the exact same food as the leanest person you know and producing a fundamentally different metabolic outcome, not because of willpower, not because of portion size, but because your gut is running a different program. Think of your gut microbiome as a factory floor. When the right bacterial populations are doing their jobs, when the fermentation processes are running cleanly, the plant produces what the body needs. Inflammation stays low, insulin sensitivity stays high. Visceral fat, the dangerous kind that surrounds your organs and that no amount of crunches will touch, has no hormonal instruction to accumulate. The satiety signals travelling from gut to brain, the ones that say you're full, you can stop, arrive on time and at full volume. Now imagine that factory floor has been systematically stripped, not by one bad decision, by decades of ultra-processed food, routine antibiotics, near-zero dietary fibre, and the near-complete disappearance of fermented foods from the American diet. The bacteria that ran the most critical metabolic processes have been displaced. The factory is still running, it's just producing the wrong thing. More hunger signals, arriving early and distorted. More fat storage commands from an insulin-resistant liver. More chronic low-grade inflammation locking adipose cells into a permanent storage posture. America didn't just build a food environment that makes people fat. It rebuilt the gut microbiome into a biological fat storage machine, and then told the people living inside those bodies that the problem was their self-control. Japan never did this, and the reason comes down to 3 biological mechanisms that American nutrition science spent decades ignoring, mechanisms that are not theoretical, not awaiting further research, not being debated. They are mechanistically understood, independently replicated, and embedded in the most unremarkable foods on a Japanese breakfast table. If you're the kind of person who wants to understand the actual biology, not the marketing, not the macros, not whatever supplement your favorite podcast is currently sponsoring, subscribe. Because what follows dismantles the model you've been given, and once it's dismantled, it can't be put back together. The first mechanism is fermentation. Not the American wellness industry's version of fermentation. The $14 kombucha with adaptogens you buy at Whole Foods and forget in the back of your fridge. Fermentation as daily biological infrastructure. Natto, fermented soybeans, consumed at Japanese breakfasts for over 1,000 years, sticky and pungent, and almost universally described by first-time American tasters as an acquired challenge, contains Bacillus subtilis var. Natto, a bacterial strain with a documented, mechanistically understood capacity to remodel the gut microbiome with regular consumption. A study published in the European Journal of Nutrition tracked participants consuming daily natto against controls over 8 weeks and found statistically significant increases in bacteroidetes alongside measurable decreases in firmicutes. 4 weeks of consistent natto shifted the gut toward a bacteroidetes dominant profile in the majority of participants. The bacteria survive stomach acid. They establish temporary colonies that alter the competitive ecology for every other bacterial population already present. This is not a supplement. This is not a bioavailability enhanced capsule with a QR code on the label. This is food. One standard package, about 40 grams, roughly 1.5 ounces, eaten cold with soy sauce, that American supplement companies would charge you $80 a month to replicate at a fraction of the bacterial load. Miso runs the same play through a parallel pathway. Long-fermented miso, red miso or hacho miso, not the mild refrigerated variety on most American grocery shelves, contains Aspergillus oryzae, a koji mold whose fermentation activity produces isoflavones, short-chain fatty acids, and prebiotic compounds that feed and diversify bacteroidetes populations. 1 tablespoon, just 1 level tablespoon, dissolved into water below 170 degrees, consumed at breakfast. Not cooked in a boiling pot, dissolved after the boil because the koji cultures are thermolabile and heat kills them. 100 million people do this every morning without thinking about it. That casual, unconsidered daily act is a gut microbiome intervention. The American dietary conversation around miso has been almost entirely about sodium for 30 years. One approach produced 4% obesity, the other produced 40%. The second mechanism is brown fat activation, and this is the one that genuinely unsettled researchers when the molecular pathway came clear, because it makes the eat less, exercise more model look not just incomplete, but almost structurally dishonest. Your body contains 2 types of fat tissue: white adipose tissue, which stores energy, and brown adipose tissue, which burns energy by generating heat. Brown fat is not a passive reserve. It is metabolically active tissue, packed with mitochondria at concentrations dense enough to give it its color. When brown fat is activated, it expresses a protein called UCP1, uncoupling protein 1, which disrupts the normal mitochondrial proton gradient and releases stored energy as heat instead of ATP. Activated brown fat is a furnace built directly into your body, and most American adults, through decades of high-calorie diets and sedentary thermoregulation, have essentially turned theirs off. Matcha contains the compound that turns it back on. EGCG, epigallocatechin galate, the primary catechin in matcha, directly upregulates UCP1 expression in brown adipose tissue. This effect is mechanistically distinct from caffeine. The American supplement industry has been selling caffeine-based thermogenics for 20 years and consistently overstating the effect. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition administered EGCG at doses equivalent to 2 to 3 daily matcha servings and measured respiratory quotient, the ratio of CO2 produced to O2 consumed, a direct proxy for substrate utilization, over 4 weeks. The respiratory quotient dropped. The subjects were burning a higher proportion of fat as fuel, not because of caloric restriction, because the thermogenic furnace was running, zero additional effect from caffeine alone. The catechin was the mechanism. Here is where the American matcha experience goes wrong, almost universally. Boiling water. Traditional preparation specifies 175 degrees. That's water that has just come off the boil and been allowed to cool for about 2 minutes, noticeably below a rolling boil. Boiling water degrades EGCG through thermal oxidation at a rate significant enough to meaningfully reduce bioavailability. The Japanese tea tradition encoded, centuries before the molecular biology existed, the exact temperature that maximizes the bioactive compound's delivery. The precision is not aesthetic, it is dosing instruction. Most Americans spend $20 on ceremonial-grade matcha and brew it in a way that destroys what they paid for. The third mechanism is the gut-brain satiety axis. And, this one reframes willpower entirely. Japanese per capita seaweed consumption, wakame, kombu, nori, hijiki, is among the highest on Earth. Seaweed fiber contains alginates and fucoidins, polysaccharide structures that resist digestion in the upper GI tract and arrive intact in the colon, where resident bacteria ferment them into short-chain fatty acids, primarily butyrate. Butyrate is the primary fuel for colonocytes, the epithelial cells lining the colon, and it directly triggers secretion of peptide YY and GLP-1, both of which signal satiety to the hypothalamus through the vagal nerve. The signal says full. It says stop. It says enough. And the hypothalamus receives it clearly, on time, at the correct volume. An American gut running on near-zero seaweed fiber, which describes virtually every American gut, produces inadequate butyrate. The satiety signal arrives late, distorted by inflammatory noise, competing with hunger hormones running at elevated baseline levels. The Japanese person who stops eating before the plate is empty is not more disciplined. Their gut-brain axis is physiologically cleaner. The reason is fiber substrate, not genetics. Substrate. You cannot solve a substrate problem with a motivation solution. Americans have been trying to do exactly that for 4 decades. The evidence is not speculative. EGCG thermogenesis studies isolated the catechin, controlled every variable, and measured UCP1 protein expression directly in brown adipose tissue. The expression increased, measured, replicated, not theorized. A 132-country correlation study mapping seaweed consumption against obesity prevalence, controlling for income, urbanization, physical activity, and total caloric intake, found seaweed among the strongest dietary predictors of population-level leanness. And the immigrant data closes the genetics argument permanently. Second-generation Japanese Americans raised on the American diet show obesity rates matching the American population, not the Japanese population. Same genes, different food, different body. Every time. Before we get to the protocol, drop a comment below. Which mechanism hit hardest? The brown fat activation, the butyrate satiety pathway, or the bacterial remodeling? I read every one. And then let's finish this. The protocol is 7 foods, not a diet, not a macro framework, not a 30-day challenge with a branded shaker bottle. 7 foods whose mechanisms are understood, whose preparation precision matters, and whose daily integration shifts gut microbiome architecture in as few as 2 weeks of consistent use. Natto, 1 standard package, about 40 grams, roughly 1.5 ounces, daily, cold. Available at virtually every Asian grocery store in America for under $2 a pack. Heat above 130 degrees deactivates the Bacillus subtilis cultures. Cold or room temperature, the bacteria survive and reach the colon intact. Soy sauce, mustard, over rice if you want the rice. The texture is a genuine adjustment, the biology is not. Long fermented miso, red miso or hacho miso, fermented 6 months minimum, not the mild white variety. 1 level tablespoon dissolved into water at 170 degrees Celsius. Bring the water to a boil, pull it off the heat, wait 2 minutes, then stir the miso in. Not simmered, not boiled with the soup. Dissolved at temperature after the heat is off. The koji cultures are the mechanism. Heat kills them. The preparation instruction is the dosing instruction. Matcha. Ceremonial grade. The catechin density difference from culinary grade is significant. About half a teaspoon, 1 to 2 grams, whisked into a quarter cup of water at 175 degrees Celsius. Not a pod machine, not steeped. Whisked until fully suspended. Without milk, milk proteins bind catechin compounds and reduce absorption. 2 servings daily, morning and afternoon. The temperature matters every single time. Wakame seaweed, about half an ounce dry, 15 grams, a small loose handful, rehydrated daily. In miso soup, as a side with sesame and rice vinegar, alongside whatever else you are eating. It expands to roughly a full cup once rehydrated, enough to feel like a real portion. Available dried at most Asian grocery stores and increasingly at mainstream American supermarkets. It keeps indefinitely on the shelf. That half ounce delivers a butyrate precursor load sufficient to measurably shift colonic fermentation activity in microbiome studies. Shiitake mushrooms, 4 to 6 fresh caps, about 3 ounces, roughly the size of your palm, or 3 heaping tablespoons of dried, rehydrated, cooked daily. Shiitake contains eritadenine, a compound that reduces LDL cholesterol through a mechanism independent of statin pathways, and beta-glucan fiber that is a documented prebiotic substrate for bacteroidetes, available at virtually every American grocery store. Costs less than the average omega-3 supplement doing a fraction of the metabolic work. Edamame. About 3.5 ounces, roughly 2/3 of a cup of shelled edamame, daily. Not soy protein isolate, not a soy bar. The real thing, available frozen at virtually every American grocery store for under $3 a bag. 12 grams of complete protein, 11 grams of fiber, and an isoflavone load that bacteroidetes resident bacteria convert into equal, a compound associated with reduced visceral fat deposition in multiple independent clinical cohorts. This conversion requires the bacteroidetes the rest of this protocol is actively rebuilding. The mechanism is locked until the microbiome is partially restored, which is why these foods work as a system and not as isolated interventions. Gyokuro or high-grade sencha green tea, brewed at 140 to 160 degrees. Water that is steaming but not yet simmering, well below a full boil. 1 standard mug, 8 ounces, in the afternoon. This temperature extracts L-theanine alongside EGCG without thermal degradation. L-theanine combined with EGCG produces calm alertness that research associates with reduced cortisol response to acute stress. Cortisol, chronically elevated in the average overstimulated American adult, directly promotes visceral fat accumulation through glucocorticoid receptor activation in adipose tissue. 1 properly brewed afternoon cup is a cortisol management protocol, not a beverage choice. The single mistake that destroys every benefit of this protocol is temperature. Heat applied to natto, miso, or matcha kills the bacterial cultures and degrades the catechin compounds. The Japanese culinary tradition around preparation temperature was not encoded arbitrarily. It was the accumulated practical intelligence of a food culture that discovered, centuries before the molecular biology had words for it, that how you prepare food determines what it does inside the body. The preparation is the protocol. Treat it precisely. Think about a kid in Osaka, 8 years old, eating breakfast before school, rice, grilled fish, a small dish of natto, miso soup with wakame and tofu, a cup of green tea her grandmother made at exactly the right temperature. She has never heard of EGCG. She has no idea what UCP1 is. She has never counted a calorie, never looked up a glycemic index, never started a diet in January, and abandoned it by March. She eats what her family eats, the way her family has always eaten it, with precision passed down through generations who didn't understand the mechanisms but lived inside their results every single day. Her gut microbiome is running cleanly. The factory floor is staffed. The brown fat furnace is warm. The butyrate is reaching her colonocytes in concentrations that keep the satiety signal clear and timely. She is not disciplined in the way American diet culture understands discipline, the willpower-intensive, shame-adjacent calorie suppression that Weight Watchers, Atkins, keto, and intermittent fasting have all built their identities around. She is simply being fed correctly. There is an enormous consequential difference between those two things, and America has spent $78 billion a year refusing to look at it. When that girl's family moves to Los Angeles, the natto stops. The miso becomes cereal. The matcha becomes a drive-through coffee. The wakame disappears entirely. Within months, the Bacteroidetes populations collapse, displaced by firmicutes perfectly adapted to the new substrate they're being given. The gut doesn't fail because the genes were wrong. It adapts, precisely and efficiently, to its new food environment. And the new food environment is the American grocery store. This is what the immigrant data shows. This is why second-generation Japanese Americans carry Japanese DNA and American obesity rates. The genes were never the variable. The food was always the variable. And that means the story is not hopeless. It means it is solvable. The diet industry built a billion-dollar business on the premise that the problem was you. Your lack of discipline, your failure to maintain a deficit, your inability to resist food that was scientifically engineered to override every satiety signal your gut could produce. That premise wasn't just wrong, it was backwards. The problem was never you, the problem was always the factory floor. Your body is not broken. It is a biological system that was designed to receive specific inputs and produce specific outputs when those inputs are present. The factory runs correctly when the raw materials are correct. American bodies are not defective. They are running on the wrong substrate, and biological systems respond to changes in substrate. The microbiome begins to shift within 2 weeks. The butyrate production increases. The satiety signal clears. The brown fat furnace restarts. Not because you tried harder, because the inputs changed. What you do with that begins tomorrow morning. A bowl of miso, a pack of natto, a quarter cup of matcha at exactly 170 fettuccine. The oldest answer to the newest American crisis, sitting on a breakfast table in Osaka, unchanged for centuries. Waiting.